Let me first start by welcoming all of you. But before I do that, let me just introduce myself. My name is Welly Lenklapo. I used to work here. I'm a pensioner. I'm not sure whether I will be able to retire at any age or any stage. So that one does not have any meaning to my life, retirement. So I wouldn't call myself a retired diplomat. I've learned that such a thing does not exist. This is one of the many moments where we gather to celebrate a former deputy minister in the Department of Foreign Affairs of South Africa. Unfortunately, he supported and worked with DIRCO after he was no more in government. I think it is proper to make that distinction. And I'm sure you'll understand why as we proceed and go on. I'm not going to say much because I think a lot has been said about Aziz, describing him in so many ways. And I'll leave that to the speakers to do so. I have with me as my co-program director, Ambassador Nozipo Padil, who will share the responsibility of steering this memorial service. Thank you for being here to assist me in trying to make sure that we do a good job. Let me start with the first speaker, Miss Cecilia Caloros. As you can see here, she's described as a former head of office. We used to call her the commander of the Charlie's Angels, because that's what Aziz used to call his staff, who were mainly female. The commander, can you come?
Thank you, Program Director, for your introduction. Minister Naledi Pandor, Deputy Minister Boetis, DG Dango, former DGs, current DG, former colleagues, current colleagues, friends, Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, Excellencies past and present, and all those that had the privilege of working with Deputy Minister Pahad. On behalf of Deputy Ministers Pahad's office, the Hells Angels, not Charlie's Angels, Hells Angels, I have the honor and the duty to pay tribute to Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad as Deputy Foreign Minister, but more affectionately known to us as Mr. P. Of the 14 years in office as Deputy Minister, I was able to spend 12 years of my career, equal to 3 postings, in support of Mr. P. where I got to learn much about what he stood for: a great strategist, a thinker, and a person with much humor and many quirks. Working closely with Mr. Pahad was a privilege and an immense pleasure, but certainly not easy. Mostly because his standards were so high. He was up earlier than his staff. He stayed up later than us. He read more widely and deeply. He consumed media faster than us and was always at least 10 steps ahead of us, literally and figuratively. He affectionately called us, his staff, his clowns, his fools, his dodos, his terracottas, to name but a few. But this was all in jest, and it came from a good place, I hope. Mr. Pahad wrote copious notes during meetings with his atrocious handwriting, and also discovered how easy media statements and speech writing could be put together through the art of copy and paste. Importantly, while international relations has many theories and labels for protagonists of history, Mr. Pahad cannot be defined by any single one. He was a realist with a deep and intuitive understanding of global power dynamics and how this impacted on domestic realities. But he was equally an optimist, always hopeful that the actors could indeed choose peace, dialogue, and mediation. Hence his lifelong pursuit of diplomacy, sometimes quiet, other times not. For him, diplomacy was never about ego, comfort, privileges, and glamour. It was about getting the job done with the least amount of fuss. His understanding of domestic and global affairs and development was highly respected and sought after, and that is why his offices in both Pretoria and Cape Town were always so full of people, and where intense and lively discussions continued late into the night, accompanied with some good whiskey or wine. And many of you here can attest to that. His formidable mind, intellect, and intuitive appreciation for how the world actually worked, together with his relentless spirit of hope, challenged us to be better at our jobs and turned us into stronger stewards of our profession and more engaged as public servants. Ladies and gentlemen, despite his deep commitment to his work, he never said no to an experience. From the deserts in Iraq to karaoke bars in North Korea, ships off the coast of Africa, tents in southern Sudan, as well as palaces, forts, bunkers, trains, temples, and a whole lot of souks and markets, where he would mingle with the locals. He was there. And he never forgot to buy souvenirs for his office. No matter where he traveled, there was always someone from the office carrying his chilies. He never wanted to be upgraded to first class. As he said, that was for old people. Such was his spirit of adventure and youthfulness, never a dull moment. Despite his sometimes punishing schedule, even as he got older, Mr. Pahad always made time for those that mattered to him. He was always a gracious and entertaining host, a friend, a counselor, a mentor, and a comrade. A good glass or glasses of wine, a delicious meal, generally curry, and good conversation was very important to him. Mr. Pahad was humble. He never forgot to greet the security at the gate or remind us to tip the drivers on an overseas trip or hotel staff. Many security personnel would, without exception, remember conversation about a Sundowns and a Pirates game. In fact, many would anticipate his arrival at the office on a Monday following a soccer match so that they could have a bit of banter about it. It is no small irony that the week in which we said farewell to Mr. Pahad was the 15th anniversary of his departure from the Union Buildings, following his resignation as Deputy Minister and a Member of Parliament. As he left the office, he held up his hand in his characteristic greeting and said, "Bye, chaps." Such was his pragmatism and lack of attachment to titles. We just had to get on with it without feeling sorry for ourselves. As we pay tribute to the world's longest serving Deputy Foreign Minister, I would like to share some of the lessons we were privileged to learn from him. Work with intention, serve always, spare no effort to make the world a better place, but know that despite all the trimmings, it is the people who matter the most. Make time to enjoy the moment. There are always moments to live life despite the task at hand. A title was not the sole determinant of contribution or character. And when all was said and done, it was character and contribution that mattered the most. Finally, keep talking. As long as you can talk, you can find solutions. I now would like to quote for you an extract from his acceptance speech when receiving his honorary doctorate in 2021, which ring truer than ever. We would do well to remember at times like these that the human family remains bound together as never before, as communities of fate, brought together by our mutual vulnerabilities and an abiding of solidarity, compassion, and interdependence. These have been the essential values that have guided South Africa's foreign policy since 1994, profoundly informed by our global landscape of grave asymmetry and deep inequality. To dear Anjina, thank you for sharing Mr. Pahad, Mr. P, with the country and the world, even when he had left office. Thank you for being his home, although he would always be a citizen of the world. Our thoughts and prayers and love are with you, the Pahad and Parik families, all the friends and loved ones of Mr. Pahad as we mourn and equally celebrate him with passion. He would not want it any other way because his life was filled with passion and purpose. His shadow upon the country's foreign policy will help to guide us for a long time to come and give us comfort as we make peace with a world of which he is no longer part. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Cecilia, for reminding us, for informing us about your experience with Aziz. You truly reflected who he was. That's the Aziz we know, the one you've just been talking about. Our own Gromiko, as we used to call him, because of his long service in one post. Zaire.
Thank you, Program Director. Minister Pando, Deputy Minister Anjina, and the rest of Aziz's family and friends, members of the Diplomatic Corps, current and former DIRCO colleagues. One of the disappointments we have is that Aziz Pahad never got to publish a follow-up to the book or that he published, that essentially is his biography. And it's largely about his early life and the time in exile, including the engagements that led to the negotiations for South Africa's democracy. This was, of course, the book Insurgent Diplomat. Consequently, we never got an insight into his experiences as Deputy Foreign Minister from his perspective. I dare say that if we were to speculate on a title for a follow-up book to The Insurgent Diplomat, it would have been called The Servant Diplomat. We often read about the necessity for servant leadership. which is a management style in which you focus on your team's growth as well as their well-being to put their needs first. The theory is that instead of employees serving the leader serves the employees. This is the kind of leadership and diplomacy that Aziz Pahad espoused through his actions and words. As a young diplomat, I was fortunate to have worked closely with and being mentored by arguably two of the most astute diplomats that South Africa has produced, Aziz Pahad and Dumisani Khumalo. What you will hear from people that interacted with them and with both these individuals is what you often hear today. Leaders with a human touch, leaders who would engage with everyone despite their rank or status, and of course, in the context of our work, leaders whose diplomatic skill and pragmatism was unsurpassed. Working with Aziz meant working in an environment of organized chaos with long hours, endless meetings, and drafting of countless reports and statements, as Cecilia has spoken about. I could go on about the examples which illustrated his simplicity and getting to the task at hand without the frills of office, whether it be dashing to getting to the airport in my little city Golf, or having to check him and Wulile, who was the president's national security advisor at the time, into one room at the 3-star hotel in New York, as no other rooms were available due to a snowstorm, and having to hear the two of them argue about who should take the bed and who should take the sleeper couch, each of them arguing that the other should take the more comfortable bed. I don't know who won that argument. You did. Colleagues, I want to, however, use this time as I think Aziz would have wanted us to, and that is to reflect on the current state of the world and the continued conflicts and underdevelopment that plagues us. Importantly, I think we must reflect on what is going on in Gaza, a region in which I was privileged to visit with Aziz and which he spent a large part of his time focusing on. I wish to reflect on the acceptance speech, which Cecilia also referred to, when Aziz accepted an honorary doctorate from the University of Pretoria on 30 April 2021. In his speech, which I encourage you all to read, he raises the question about how did we get to such a fragile and fragmented state of global relations. He notes the characteristics of the current environment, which in his assessment include the failure of globalization, the growing influence of the military-industrial complex, the dominance of neoliberalism and the Washington Consensus, the disregard of the UN Charter and international law with impunity, growing threats to regional and international peace and security, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, the growth of populist political and economic nationalism and anti-democratic tendencies, and the then, at that time, unprecedented consequences of COVID-19. Aziz goes on to say that throughout history, there are examples of moments of unprecedented crisis that present threats to the very future of humanity. And humanity responded as a united and decisive force to defeat such threats. This, however, requires true leadership to rebuild trust amongst nations and a united and decisive global response to the threats and challenges that face us all. It would require us to rise up against violations of international law and oppression against civilians. It would require the nations of the world to adhere to international law commitments and the UN Charter in a fair and consistent manner to ensure credibility. We see what is going on in Gaza with very little action on the part of the international community to stop the atrocities being committed against innocent civilians. A few hours ago, the United Nations Security Council, which is entrusted with the maintenance of international peace and security, and has as one of its core mandates the protection of civilians, the Security Council failed to adopt an outcome calling for alleviating the humanitarian situation in Gaza. This failure is an antithesis to the UN Charter. As I conclude, if we are to ensure a world that the South African foreign policy strives for, which is a united, peaceful, and prosperous Africa and a better world, then we need to continue to speak out and take meaningful steps to ensure that there is a humaneness in international relations and trust between nations. These are the ideals that people like Aziz Pahad stood for. I thank you.
No, thank you, Zahir, for your tribute. On the issue of sharing in that room, I think it will be wrong if I don't explain how I won the battle. There was a small table, we were sitting around it. And because we were drowning our sorrows, having have to come back from the airport, I knew that at some point the call of nature will come. And when he stood up to go to the one only other room, I decided to go to the couch, and he found me sleeping. Of course, there was a barrage of swear words that had to come in my way. I just ignored him. Those are just some of the moments where the human being in Aziz would come out, because he thought I should sleep in the bed. And I didn't see the reason why he shouldn't do so. So there was no real discussion. And I think you described it correctly when you say it was a fight. It was very spirited, but it ended well. Of course, in the morning for some time, there was no talking to each other until we got to the airport, and he asked me,
I've got a bigger one.
why did I decide to go to sleep before we had agreed that it's time to sleep? I'm going to call upon the next speaker, Ambassador Gert Grobler. I'm sure Gert will explain himself. I don't have to introduce him, but I know many people, they know him by a particular name, or they call him something. When we arrived here, we came to discover that he's affectionately called Mooi Gert. Now, Mooi in Afrikaans could mean handsome or beautiful. So, Mooi Gert, come.
Program directors, Minister Naledi Pandor, Mrs. Anele Mbeki, Deputy Ministers, DG, Excellencies, the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished guests, colleagues, and most of all, the family members of our beloved Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad. It is indeed a great pleasure and an honor to be part of these celebrations on the life of our revered Deputy Minister Pahad. And it must be said, and said again and repeated, and has been said over the last couple of weeks, the Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad was not just a public figure, he was a symbol of resilience, dedication, and unwavering commitment to the betterment of South Africa and people wider field internationally. Deputy Minister Pahad was an architect of diplomatic efforts to isolate the apartheid regime on the international stage, ensuring that the world knew about the injustices being perpetrated here. I was fortunate and blessed to have known Deputy Minister Pahad from the period soon after he returned to South Africa from exile in 1990, mainly flowing from my career in the then Department of Foreign Affairs, and of course then later DIRCO, which I left in 2017. And I had the privilege of having been able to work very closely with Deputy Minister Pahad for over all those years, and it included many an official trip abroad. I'd come to the beds and the karaoke later. But he also became, and I was blessed, he became a good friend over the years. Allow me to lift out a few special memories and anecdotes about Aziz Pahad, which reflect his brilliance and shrewdness as a strategist and a diplomat par excellence. Firstly, I must add that Aziz Pahad, during his years in exile, for the reasons I mentioned, was a household name in the security files of the previous regime. And needless to say, I'm sure that his actions in amplifying the voice of those oppressed by apartheid caused the previous nationalist regime major headaches and sleepless nights over many years. Secondly, in fact, Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad contributed extensively to the transition from apartheid to democracy in those early years, a role well described in his later book called Insurgent Diplomat, Civil Talks or Civil War, which was already alluded to. I so vividly recall the many amicable events with Deputy Minister Pahad on visits to London in the period after 1994, where we sat for hours together with anti-apartheid stalwarts, inter alia, the late Mike Terry, the late Lord Bob Hughes, the late Uncle Mendy Mizimang, with whom I worked at SA House for a number of years, Vela Pillay, and many others. Discussions and exchanges that went into late in the night. And I recall how Aziz, in his typical fashion manner, gave insights into the leadership of inspirational figures such as Oliver Tambo, Nelson Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, Yusuf Dadoo, and many others, and how he elaborated on the central role played by the ANC in rescuing this country from the brink of disaster. But I must add, these events did not only take place in London, but a whole host of other capitals in Europe, to which I accompanied Deputy Minister Pahad over the years. And there I am reminded of the odd visit to a karaoke bar in those capitals. Because during his extensive tour of duty as Deputy Minister, and with his typical and endearing Aziz style, he was able to create a vast network of political, academic, and diplomatic connections. His passing is therefore indeed mourned by countless friends, comrades, and colleagues in South Africa and across the globe. Thirdly, in this context, much has been written about the role of Deputy Minister Pahad in support of President Thabo Mbeki in facilitating and being part of the talks between the exiled ANC at the time and representatives of the Afrikaner community in the mid-80s. Talks that took place in Lusaka, Dakar, Paris, Leverkusen, Lucerne, and which eventually paved the way for dialogue between the ANC and the then South African government. And I'd like to add that Afrikaner friends of mine and acquaintances who were instrumental in that process, and there are a number of them, but people like Professor Willie Esterhazy, Professor Pieter de Lange, Theo Steyn, a well-known South African entrepreneur who went to Lusaka in 1985 to engage the ANC, and a number of others, subsequently lauded and commended Aziz Pahad's constructive, reconciliatory approach, and an important role in that whole process. After his return to South Africa in 1990, Aziz Pahad, amongst others, played a vital role in transforming the old DFA of which I was part and adjusting it to the new realities of a democratic and non-racial, non-sexist South Africa. I had the privilege of being part of the DFA, or the then DFA's delegation, led by former DFA DG Neil van Heerden, during the very first official meeting with the ANC International Department at the DFA Waterkloof Guesthouse in 1991. The ANC delegation was led by President Tambo and included former Minister Alfred Nzo and stalwarts, of course, like Deputy Minister Pahad, Stanley Mabazela, Walilo and Slapo, Joseph Shaluji. And the meeting, which initially was scheduled for 2 hours, eventually went on for 6 hours. And I recall how Aziz, with his reaching out and unassuming approach, contributed to a better mutual understanding and a positive outcome to the proceedings that evening that eventually led to a relatively or smooth change from the old DFA to the new DFA. Perhaps I could just add, when we got to about 7 o'clock in the evening and the ANC delegation under President Mbeki were contemplating whether they should leave now, it was decided against that they would stay on for another 2 or 3 hours. Now, I asked Deputy Minister, or Aziz at the time, I hope we didn't cause any inconvenience for you with your arrangements for this evening. And he said to me, no. I said, we were supposed to see, we had a meeting with Helen Suzman. Many of you will know who Helen Suzman was. And he said, but tonight, foreign affairs reign supreme. So we're here to talk. As we all know, got to know Deputy Minister Pahad after his return to South Africa from exile. Many of us here in the DFA at the time soon started to refer to him as, quote, a living and walking encyclopedia of international relations, unquote, given his exceptional and remarkable knowledge, experience, and insight into international relations. Let me conclude by saying that all of us over the years who worked with Deputy Minister Pahad, and many, not only in DFA or DIRCO, but in academia, in business, and in civil society, will always remember Aziz Pahad's humility. And it's been alluded to, his ability to connect with people from all walks of life, and his unwavering belief in the power of dialogue and diplomacy. He was a bridge builder, always seeking common ground and striving for peaceful solutions to even the most challenging problems. Above all, he was a brilliant mentor who never hesitated to share his knowledge and experience, particularly with younger colleagues at the DFA, DERCO, and again in a wider field in academia, civil society, etc. I want to conclude by saying, repeating and quoting what President Ramaphosa said at the official funeral the other day, which for us as diplomats, ex-diplomats, was a very, very important statement the President made. I quote, the President said, "It is a sad day for the diplomatic community, particularly for the many men and women chosen to represent our country abroad who had the privilege of being mentored, counseled, and trained by our departed brother and comrade, Aziz," unquote. So, for me, as someone who still regards DERCO as my family, let us keep alive the indelible mark on the pages of history that Aziz Pahad left. As an ex-DFA and DERCO official, it is essential and imperative that DERCO and its diplomats continue to celebrate Aziz's enduring legacy and to emulate the exemplary example set by him. I wish to conclude by saying to Anjina and the whole family that our heartfelt prayers and thoughts remain with you in this difficult time of grief, mourning, and a profound sense of an irreplaceable loss. Aziz Pahad will be sorely missed. May his soul rest in peace. I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Moepaert. Minister Pando, Deputy Ministers, the DG and Deputy GGs, the family, Mrs. Pahad and your family who are here present, and those who are not here as well, to remember them. Mrs. Mbeki Sizanele, former ambassadors and the diplomatic corps. It's always sad to come to these occasions when we remember somebody who has been with us and has actually changed many of our lives. Because my desire is always how we don't tell the stories. And I think the stories of Aziz Pahad is one that perhaps somebody needs to write, not him writing the story. But before we start the next session, I'd like to ask the choir to give us a piece. In the meantime, I'll ask the next speakers to come up. And this is Mr. What is my brother?
Silone mi moja siti hai. Hai, silone mi moja. Silone mi moja siti hai. Hai, a siliti nella bat. Silone mi moja siti hai. Hai, silone mi moja.
Thank you very much, Akwaya. Just a little bit about my relationship with Aziz before I invite the speakers to come up. And I'm not going to talk about, as Ambassador Nhlapo rightly said, this is about the speakers paying tribute to Aziz. But I thought just to say something about my own relationship with Aziz, which started in 2001 when I joined the Department of Foreign Affairs and I was posted to Switzerland. And it really was such an honor and a pleasure to work with what I've always described as dream team of leaders in the Department of Foreign Affairs at the time, led by President Mbeki. And of course, the Department of Foreign Affairs was the neighbor of the presidency at the union buildings. And there was lots of interaction between the two departments. And when I see Mujanko Gumbi, advocate, and Mr. Frank Chikane sitting there, they do bring back lots of memories of the time when diplomacy was something that we had not been taught, but we called ourselves activist diplomats because we came from being activists and being advocates of our new democracy. And we came in and had these amazing leaders. And I must also take the opportunity of mentioning Dr. Nsaluba, who was the DG at the time, and of course, Sue van der Merwe, who is responsible for the administrative part of the Department of Foreign Affairs, and Mkhuseni Apleni, who really started building this building that we are currently sitting in at the time. So really, what a pleasure to have been led by leaders like Aziz. Aziz was our political guru. If we had political issues that we needed to understand better, we went to him. Our DG was one of the best managers that we ever had. Certainly, the whole team was, for me personally, the best part of my career is the 5 years that I spent at Foreign Affairs, been led by President Mbeki and his dream team as well. So I'll ask I'll ask Professor Antony van Niekerk, who is an academic from, are you still at Wits-Prof? UNISA, to come up to the stage and say what he needs to say. Aziz was always very committed to the role of academia in diplomacy because he was also a man of ideas. He believed in the production of ideas and the production of knowledge, and so never separated himself from the universities. And Professor Antony van Niekerk played quite a role in making DIRCO, in assisting the department in understanding what was going on in the world, so that we had quite a wide kind of things of what was really happening. So without much ado, I'll ask Antony van Niekerk.
Co-program directors, Mr. Pandor, DG, Mrs. Mbeki, the Pahad family, the choir, ambassadors, many friends in the room and colleagues. I'm happy to see old faces. As with the funeral, it's coming together and much to discuss. Thank you for the opportunity for me to reflect not only on Aziz as a friend, but on the contribution of Aziz to the academic practitioner interface. And I want to highlight 5 themes that is reflective of the unique relationship between Aziz and a small community of South African foreign policy analysts and scholars. And let me start with the late 80s and the early 1990s, when members of the ANC's Department of International Affairs worked fairly closely with a small group of academics in producing the ANC's foreign policy paper entitled Foreign Policy in a New Democratic South Africa, a discussion paper. Building on the policy conference of 1991, the document was released in 1993. It was a brave and forward-looking choice to bring academic voices into the formulation of this visionary and progressive document. Some of the key members involved in the process included Aziz, Tambo Mbeki, Yusuf Saluji, Stanley Mabizela, Freni Janwala, Mavivi Manzini, and amongst some of the academics, Peter Vale, Rob Davies, Alan Hirsch, Gary van Staden, John Daniel, Vincent Mapai, Maxi Skuman, and myself. I revisited the paper yesterday, and I believe it remains as relevant today as then. And Wilile, I wonder of the DIRCO staff present here in the room now, our younger colleagues, have you read this discussion document? I didn't see hands. Can you grasp those 7 principles that has guided the ANC's foreign policy over several decades? It's worth having that paper to surface again for our conversation. And that paper set the scene for an ongoing engagement amongst DIRCO, the presidency, and academics over the next decades in shaping foreign and national security, white papers, policies, and strategies. But it wasn't always plain sailing. Many of you will recall the controversy around Chapter 7 of the National Development Plan, called Positioning South Africa in the World. Some of us suspected it was written by an economist who viewed international relations through a macroeconomic lens with a narrow focus on trade. We made valiant attempts to reposition the chapter, but to little effect. If there is a serious attempt to revive the failed NDP, then this debate between the promotion of human rights and economic interests must be revived. It is a debate that must take into account our national interests, national security, our identity as a leading African nation, and our vision for a better world. Aziz was also instrumental in facilitating the establishment in 1995, with support from the German Chancellor Kohl and the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, of the Foundation of Global Dialogue, today's Institute for Global Dialogue, situated at UNISA. I recall the Institute of International Affairs, Jan Smuts' house at Wits, was angry at this development, thinking it was a waste of time and money for the ANC to have a dedicated foreign policy think tank. The keynote speaker at the launch of the foundation was none other than Ali Mazrui. I recall that his lecture, which I helped organize with Garth Lepierre, ruffled feathers because he proposed the revival of the trusteeship concept. However, with great foresight, in 1995, he called for the establishment of an African Security Council, a Pan-African Emergency Force, and an African High Commissioner for Refugees. And as we know, following a unique combustion of intellectual fervor amongst influential African leaders, including President Mbeki, in 2002, the African Union was born. The first foundation publication written by Garth and myself in 1996 was a proposal for the establishment of a South African version of the Council on Foreign Relations. So Aziz resigned from government and parliament in 2008, but in retirement maintained his activities as a diplomat scholar, which is the way I like to think of him. Apart from the publication of the Insurgent Diplomat book that we refer to which the IGD gave much support, he played a prominent role together with his brother Esop in a small but influential think tank, the Concerned Africans Forum, or CAF, which was born in the aftermath of NATO's destruction of Libya in 2011. It was driven by a belief in the ability of Africa to understand the world it lives in and how it can overcome the constraints in preparing a better life for Africa. Many valuable publications were produced under the CAF banner. The brothers Pahad leave a huge gap in the functioning of the CAF, and this might be the time for a reflective assessment of its purpose. And from 2015, Aziz headed up the short-lived South African Council on International Relations. The purpose of SACWIRE, which had wide stakeholder representation, was to review South Africa's foreign relations and advise government and society accordingly. And speaking from first-hand experience, Chair, SACWIRE's potential was strangled unceremoniously by disinterested politicians. In 2018, the Ramaphosa administration, President Ramaphosa asked him to lead a commission to review South Africa's international relations. The review reported on a range of practical recommendations to assist in restoring South Africa's lost glory as the co-architect and driver of the African Renaissance. The Commission, as with the Council, was never given a proper hearing, I believe. And this is perhaps illustrative of another reality, the essence of Aziz's contribution to a progressive, African-oriented foreign policy and international relations worldview was ultimately ignored by many in the corridors of foreign policy making. Given the emergence of Cold War 2.0, as demonstrated by NATO in Ukraine, Israel and Gaza, but also the enlargement of the BRICS alliance, There is need for a clear South African approach to international relations, reformulated foreign and security policy and strategies, underpinned by a well-understood and accepted national interest doctrine. The question lingers: how do we tap into the valuable academic practitioner interface which Aziz and his team led for so many years? Thank you.
Thank you very much. One of the things that also happened inside the department in the years 2001 plus is that many women joined the department because the president felt that there had not been many women in this Department of Foreign Affairs, and we needed to have a presence. 33% was the quota, but I think Foreign Affairs went beyond that. And so I'm saying this today because I think it's an important issue that the department has maintained under the leadership of our president as our minister, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma at the time, and also, of course, Aziz, and very, very supportive of all of us who were posted without necessarily having been trained as diplomats, but who taught us the rules as we were implementing our foreign policy abroad. But it also created a strong relationship with civil society. And because peace and security was always at the center of South Africa's foreign policy, the relationship with Vaso Gowden was one of it's a legendary relationship, and one that the department still has very strong links with his institution. Vasu, it's always nice to see you, and please take the floor.
When Ambassador Waddell started with gender, I thought she had mistaken my gender when she was going to introduce me. Program directors, Minister Naledi Pandor, Deputy Minister, Director General, Professor Anjana Parak Pahad, Sis Zanile Mbeki, Dean of the Diplomatic Corps and members of the Diplomatic Corps, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. In a country and world as complicated and conflictual as the one we live in, when we cannot find anyone who has a bad word to say about an individual, then that individual must have a very rare quality. Such was the character of Aziz Pahad. His life was a living testimony to the concept of servant leadership, and his life's work serves as an enduring testament to his unwavering commitment to justice, peace, and equality. Throughout his remarkable journey, Aziz Pahad left an indelible mark not only on South Africa, but also on the international stage. My first encounter with Aziz Pahad was in 1987. I was asked by the struggle veteran Billy Nair to go to London and to meet with Aziz Pahad and to arrange a meeting for a group of students with the ANC leadership. Of course, it was 1987, was just after the state of emergency in South Africa. And I got to London with a piece of paper with the telephone number on it, and I was told to call this number. So I called the number, and the gentleman picked it up on the other side and said, "Yes, I'm expecting you. Meet me tomorrow at the Russell Square station. There will be a newspaper stand." And I said, "How will I know who you are?" And he said, "Carry an umbrella." And needless to say, the next day when I pitched up at the Russell Square station, thousands of people were there with umbrellas. And so I wondered, how was I going to recognize this man, or how was he going to recognize me? And then I had a tap on my shoulder, and I turned around, and there was this bearded, tall gentleman who said, "Follow me." And of course, I followed him. We went down a little passage to a hotel on the side street, and straight to the bar, of course, for a conversation. And he said, "What will you drink?" And of course, I was meeting this very senior ANC member, and I thought, let me behave a little. And I said, "I will have a glass of orange juice." And he turned to the barman and said, "One milk stout and one orange juice." And I thought, well, I should have had something stronger. We were about to sit down to have our conversation when he said, "Wake up, let's go." And I thought, this is very strange. And we then rushed out of the hotel. And as we rushed out, he said, "Did you see those two white guys there?" And I said, "Yeah, there were two white guys sitting." And he said, "That's Bureau of State Security. So I'm more concerned about you going back home than my own safety here in London." Well, that meeting took place in Harare. 6 students were sent from South Africa to meet with the ANC leadership. They were led by President Mbeki, Paulo Jordan, Aziz Pahad, Mac Maharaj, and others who met them. Unfortunately, all 6 students, on returning to South Africa, were arrested at the time. But just to underscore the weakness of the then apartheid regime intelligence services, they arrested them, indicating that they had all gone there to plan with the ANC to set up NADEL, which was the National Association of Democratic Lawyers, Majanko, which you will know. And none of the students went there to talk about anything about NADEL. I later met Aziz when he came back from exile. He was in South Africa. I just returned from Washington, where I had specialized in conflict management, and I went to Shell House to meet with Aziz to discuss what I had specialized in. And he immediately said, "I think we should go and see Tambo." And so off we went to Hillbrow, where President Mbeki then lived. And he said, "Tell Comrade Tambo what you've done." And I said, "This is what I've done." And they said, "Well, we need this immediately in South Africa. We need to train our people in conflict management, and we need to deal with the myriad of conflicts we have in the country. And so you should go to the 5 historically black universities and ask the principals of those universities to be your trustees and set up an institution." That's the birth of Accord. And that was Aziz Pahad's association with Accord also. In his later years, after he left Foreign Affairs, and I have to say during his entire period as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, we had the opportunity to interact with him. He was very open to interacting with academics, with civil society, and ensuring that the foreign policy of our country was informed by a broad spectrum of voices in our society. And so he very often at the Foreign Affairs Guest House had a number of us meeting there to debate and discuss the foreign policy of the country. In his later years, when he resigned from government, and I always say he finally got himself a proper job, he joined Accord as senior political advisor. His presence at Accord's meetings with warring factions in regions such as Palestine, Syria, Sudan, South Sudan, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, among others, brought unparalleled knowledge, expertise, and gravitas to what we were doing. Aziz was a familiar name to everyone we encountered, either through personal interactions or by his reputation. For those of us fortunate enough to learn from his vast experience, it was a rare and invaluable opportunity. I think I would be amiss if I didn't say that if Aziz Pahad was standing here today, he would be extremely distraught about what we are seeing currently on our continent and in the world. We traveled many times to Sudan, to Khartoum. And Aziz led our meetings with many of the current protagonists in the conflict in Sudan. And I'm sure that he would be extremely distraught by what we are seeing in Sudan today. Palestine. We spent 10 days crisscrossing Palestine, the West Bank, Gaza, Nablus, and we had a series of meetings with the leadership of Fatah and the leadership of Hamas. We met there with Dr. Zahar, we met with Prime Minister Ania, and I have to say that Aziz Pahad was an extremely good listener. We also went to Syria at the start of the Syrian conflict. And there we met also with the leader of Hamas, Meshal, and we met with a delegation from Hezbollah who came through to Damascus, and we had very long meetings. Again, Aziz, his incisive mind and analytical mind and his keen sense of listening showed the kind of advice that he was giving to all of those that we met. He was talking about our experience in South Africa and how even on the eve of our elections, many people don't realize that on election day, the airport in Johannesburg was bombed, that downtown Johannesburg, there were bombs. And what people don't realize that we ourselves as South Africans came very close to a civil war. And so these were the lessons that we went to impart to all of our colleagues. And I have to say, currently, what Aziz would say is there's nobody in the current situation that we cannot sit down and talk to. And therefore, I think if ever we have to honor Aziz's life, what we should do is strive as hard as possible today to ensure that the war that we are seeing currently, the destruction that we are seeing today, and the carnage that we are witnessing today in Palestine and in other parts of the world comes to a stop, and that we get people back to the table to talk. He was a big believer in listening and talking. Beyond his diplomatic achievements, Aziz Pahad was known for his humility, as many have said, and approachability. He possessed a unique ability to bridge divides and forge connections with individuals from all walks of life. His warmth and compassion endeared him not only as an effective diplomat, but also as a cherished figure among those who had the privilege of knowing him. In addition to imparting lessons in international relations, Aziz Pahad also left us with profound teachings in humility, kindness, generosity, and the art of being a better human being. I fondly recall how, as Cecilia also mentioned earlier, during our travels, he never failed to share some fruit or something from the breakfast with our drivers. He would always say, take a fruit and let's give it to the driver. Through such simple gestures, he touched the lives of many and imparted invaluable lessons. As we reflect on the life of Aziz Pahad, we are reminded of the enduring legacy he leaves behind. He stood as a man of unwavering principles, committed to justice and equality. His contributions to South Africa's liberation and his diplomatic triumphs on the world stage will echo through the generations to come. While Aziz Pahad's passing is an immense loss, his spirit lives on in the hearts of those he inspired and in the positive transformations he helped bring about in the world. His legacy serves as a beacon of hope, underscoring the enduring power of dedication, diplomacy, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Aziz Pahad's life epitomized the values of resilience, compassion, and unwavering dedication. He was a hard worker. And I believe what Cecilia said, in the 10 days that we were in Palestine, where we had a number of meetings, and then we went over to Israel and we had a number of meetings in Israel as well. We would get to bed very late in the night. Needless to say, Aziz always could endure a very late night. And that would go on till early hours of the morning, probably 2 o'clock in the morning. But every day, religiously, at 7 in the morning, Aziz would be at breakfast, having read the newspapers, and even more remarkably, the notes, the copious notes that Cecilia talked about. The next morning, Aziz would have highlighted everything in the paper. And you said, Aziz, between 2 o'clock in the morning and the time you get here, where did you find time to do all of this? And Aziz found time to do all of that. That was the kind of resilience that he had. His contributions to South Africa's struggle for freedom and his diplomatic accomplishments on the global stage will forever be etched in the annals of history. As we bid farewell to this remarkable statesman, let us honor his memory by persisting in our efforts to build a world guided by justice, equality, and peace. Aziz has made a huge contribution to our country. He's made a huge contribution to our continent and to our world. And I want to say on behalf of the trustees of Accord, Aziz has made a huge, huge contribution to our work at Accord. His legacy shines as a testament to the profound impact one individual can have on the lives of many. I thank you.
Thank you, Vosi. Welcome to Oliver Tambo building. That's what you get when you come into this place. Of course, it's only in remembrance of Oliver Tambo that such rich review of where we come from, that today we can be able to have the discussions that or what we have heard about Aziz. Anthony, I'm sure the leadership of DERCO took note of the discussion document that you referred to. I think it will help in reintroducing it to our diplomats, current diplomats, just for them to be able to read, to understand where we come from, because in many cases when you watch local TV, there are many professors who say a lot of things as what they call commentators and other names, and quite often, unashamedly, maybe not deliberately, distort our foreign policy. So it is important for our diplomats to be able to revisit some of the basic documents of where we started, so that we can be able to make sure that if as we continue to endeavor the professionalization of this department, we never lose our origins. I think also maybe at some point we'll need to have a discussion on this issue of the Council on Foreign Relations. I'm glad that you have raised it. It's important that we do so, because that's another forum that we need. Independent, but working very closely with government and South African society, as it was first conceived or suggested at the time when there was that discussion document that you referred to. What was attempted and the manner in which it phased out is something that Aziz continued to regret. But at the same time, I think it's something that we'll need to revive if we have to make sure that we have to protect our foreign policy, project it for what it is, so that it continues to serve our national interest. I will now call upon the choir to give us the musical item, and then we'll just read a few messages before we come to the next speakers. Choir, please. Thank you very much to the choir for this, for the song. There are about 5 messages that have been received by the family, which I hope DILCO will be able to circulate. I will just mention where they came from. They're quite short, but I might not want to read the contents of all of them because there's a possibility of doing injustice to some of them because they're not of the same length. Some of them, it can be easily to read them in a swipe and others one will have to pick the essence of the message. But all of them, there's something that goes through all of them. It's a real recognition of the role that Aziz Pahad played in fostering relations between South Africa and some of the people who have sent us these messages. We've got a message here from the Embassy of Palestine, obviously indicating the special relationship that they had with Aziz Pahad and the role that he played in promoting the cause of the Palestinian people. Part of what we have heard already from Vasu, even in terms of the initiatives that were taken. And then we have a message from the High Commission of Cyprus, again in the same vein, because Aziz Pahad was given the assignment to the one who coordinate relations with specific regions and countries, and therefore had this kind of special relationship with those countries and some of the embassies and ambassadors for different reasons. There's one from the High Commission, Cyprus, and then there's a message from a very short, sweet one, which I also want read from Vladimir Shubin. Vladimir Shubin was the main person who was coordinating the relationships between the ANC and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The programs and support that we used to get from that country. He's got a very special relationship that developed with many other freedom fighters of the ANC. In fact, he knows people at that time more than anybody you can think of. And he recounts also the special relationship with the family and acknowledges the warmth that he had enjoyed from time to time when he visited, and the hospitality from Anjina and Aziz. Then we've got a message from Anand Singh, from the Indian Congress Party, who was also a minister at the time when Aziz was minister, deputy minister at Foreign Affairs. He recounts that, and of course sends a message from Sonia Gandhi, who has expressed grief over Aziz's demise and expresses personal condolences to the family. And the last one is a message from the Basque region in Spain. Again, a very short, sweet one to the family, expressing condolences about the death of Aziz and the excellent relations and the privilege of meetings that they've had with him over the period when he was a deputy minister. And of course, underscore his commitment to the struggle of the people of Western Sahara, Ireland, or the Basque country as a strong supporter of the peace process. Those are just about a few messages that we had received. it is now my privilege and honor to call upon two at first, before I come to the Dean, of the people that have had a close relationship with Aziz, as the co-program director has mentioned. At that time when Department of Foreign Affairs used to occupy the west wing of the Union building before relocating to here, the synergy and relationship that existed between the presidency and the Department of Foreign Affairs and the coordination of foreign policy and the excellent team that was built through those processes. Allow me to call upon Advocate Mujanku Gumbi, former special advisor to former President Mbeki and a family friend. He's also a chancellor somewhere. I don't know what that's.
Don't be jealous because you're not a chancellor.
I'm not educated like you.
Minister Pando and Deputy Minister, the Angina, my sister, and the institution, Sizanel, and members of the Diplomatic Corps, DG. Let me just stand on the protocol that has already been observed. I've never been a diplomat, so I may end up making mistakes. I used to ask President Mbeki, I told Aziz, just put in a good word for me to become an ambassador. So President Mbeki says to me, well, you know, Mujanku, you'll have to be very nice to the Minister of Foreign Affairs first, the DG, and you'll have to be very nice to the President, and I don't think you'll meet that test. So I was never appointed ambassador. Minister Pando, I'm still in the running. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just, and my DG is here, Ayandan Zaluba. I think I just want to talk about one or two things about Aziz. You know, I was allocated and sent on very difficult missions. And most of the time it was either with Aziz or Sydney Mufamadi. And it, you know, I carried this weight, first of all, of Aziz. Aziz, who was very close to my boss, to President Mbeki. Aziz, who, I mean, just to step back a little, you know, President Mbeki, okay, English is not my first language. So I would say President Mbeki is a little private, Sizanele, a little shy as well. And, but you know, with Aziz, in the last few months when Aziz was sick, we were talking about it with Angina. He was at Aziz's bedside like twice a day. You know, he used all means necessary to get to Aziz's house, and I won't discuss them here because some of them sort of walk or parallel to what is required in terms of security. But he did everything possible to be by Aziz's side every day. And I really have never, that's why I say I understood the weight of working with Aziz, because I've never seen such a, you know, profound brotherhood and friendship between Thabo Mbeki and Aziz Pahad, especially because President Mbeki, Sizanele, don't tell him I said this. He's a little bit of a coward. So, you know, he doesn't like sick people. He always says that, you know, I went to see Joe Modise and after that he passed Mujanku. And then I went to see Steve Chwete and after that he passed. So I'm not going to see people in hospital or who are sick. But he couldn't stay away from being with Aziz. I mean, there's just a strong bond. So I would be sent on these missions, and I'm just going to mention two for the sake of time. So we went to the US with President Mbeki. Aziz was not on that trip, Nkosazana was. And we met, I think it was with President Bush that time. Another time, Israel had really gone through the usual blockade of the Palestinian territories and complete blockade, no medicine, no food, no nothing. And Prime Minister Ariel Sharon was in Washington for a working visit. So President Mbeki says, but President Bush, this really punishment, collective punishment of innocent people is not the best thing. So President Bush says, okay, I'll arrange for you to meet Prime Minister Sharon this afternoon. So there we go. I think it was Ambassador Masikela, four of us or something, to meet Prime Minister Sharon. Needless to say, all I would say was that after that meeting, those of you who know me know I don't drink alcohol at all. So after that meeting, President Mbeki says to me, Mjangu, I'm sure today you will also want a stiff one. When we went back to the hotel. But having failed, President Mbeki having failed to get through to Prime Minister Sharon, came back and decided I'm going to send my ace, Aziz Pahad, to Israel, to try and just to explain that, oppressed people would come back time and again. They would never give up. So, and the one thing that President Mbeki told me, most of you know I'm not from the ANC, but I respect this. He says, Mjangu, President Tambo, O.R. Tambo, told us once that, we've been so angry with the South African regime, with the Afrikaners in South Africa, that one day when they send a genuine message that they want to talk, we will miss it. So I remember that all the time. I'm like, President Tambo was just such leadership out of that to say we must never, ever miss that message that comes from the Boers that they are ready to talk because we've been so angry with them. So I said to Aziz, so President Mbeki comes back and says, no, Aziz, you're going to Israel. Maybe if you meet with the generals and the leadership, something will come out of it. And I get tagged along. Mjangu, you're going with Aziz to Israel. So we get to Israel, very well received, and the meetings were going well with the politicians. Then we meet with the generals. And, Aziz is managing this meeting very well. I'm really impressed. I'm like, this one knows what he's doing. Now, I'm an officer of the court. I'm a lawyer. So me, I'm taught to tell the truth. So I asked the generals in the meeting, I'm like, but tell me, the only reason you could treat people like that is if you think that they're not human. There must be something, that concept of othering, in order to justify what you are doing to them. And I'm telling you, after that, the meeting went south. And by the time we left that meeting, our cars, our protocol was withdrawn. And as he says to me, I'm never coming back to Israel with you again. And he never did. When he was appointed, I think with Zola Square, a special envoy for the Middle East, he came to me, he says, stay far away from me. I don't want to be involved in this. But I'm like, Aziz, but I was just telling the truth because, finally, people are going to have to talk and resolve their differences. The one other one is we go to Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, and things are really tough there. So that day is just President Mbeki and me in civilian clothes. Everyone is wearing fatigues and there's war and they block the communication and terrible, terrible. The French say to us, don't come because it's not safe because they had taken over the airport in Cote d'Ivoire. And Nkosazana is like, no, Mr. President, you can't go to Cote d'Ivoire. The French foreign minister has told me there's no security and what. So President Mbeki is like, are we canceling? I'm like, no, we are going. So we go to Cote d'Ivoire. Difficult day. In the middle of the day, President Mbeki speaks to President Chirac because the situation was really bad from Cote d'Ivoire. But the French soldiers did go ahead and kill some people outside Hotel Ivoire. But anyway, it was a very difficult, it's a long story, difficult time. So we come back and President Beck says, no, let me get my ace again, Aziz, to go to the Elysee and see whether we can make some progress on this. So somehow I get attached to Aziz again. So off we go. And I say to Aziz, we're going, because we really didn't have time. So we're going in and out to France. So we landed in the morning and left in the afternoon. And he never forgave me for that. He kept saying, Mujamko, you'll get to my age and you'll know what it does to fly overnight into Paris and then fly back the same day. Aziz tried his best. And you know, it didn't really land very well. As I say, I came to understand that, you know, when I work with Aziz, I'm working with President Beg. And it was President Beg used to say, if you guys go and mess up, used to say to Ngosazana, you'll come and fix. You don't go, just stay back. If Aziz and Mujamku mess up, and Sydney, of course, was always there. I would leave the American part to Sydney, the many missions, quiet missions we made to the US on Iran, Iraq, and the work that Aziz do, amazing work that he did to go to Iraq first. But I'm sure Sydney will talk about that. Sydney likes the Americans these days. Ambassador, you should take him with you to Washington. He's totally on your side. But you know, I just want to I want to end really on the personal side. You know, Aziz was a friend. The program says, you know, Aziz was family. You know, my children, Tami and Kopano, loved Aziz just as much as they were so scared of Aesop. in equal measure. You know, they would be like, Ma, but, you know, Uncle Aesop, really, he would shout at them all the time. But they loved Aziz so much. So Foreign Affairs used to have an event at the end of the State of the Nation address, a party or dinner or something. So my son, when he was at university, was working part-time for his upkeep. I couldn't afford to keep him. So he was running the bar for this company that used to be the one running that foreign affairs gig. And so he said to me, I used to tell all my barmen that this is my uncle Aziz. He'll show them a picture. And that one will look after him. So every time Aziz ordered a double, they sent him a single. And and then my son says, I'll be watching him because my son would run the bar from behind, and I would watch him. And if I think Uncle Aziz is talking at the top of his voice, I would say to my staff that if he orders, even if it's a single or double, you just give him colored water. He won't know the difference. So I mean, once my son finished university, came back, I told Aziz only then. He was so upset. He went to him. He's like, that explains it. That's why I never got drunk at those parties. Now, we know that at some stage, Aziz got very scared of the doctors who told him to stop drinking. So he stopped for a while. So a few months later, I see Aziz with a glass of red wine. I'm like, Aziz, didn't the doctor say you must stop drinking? He's like, oh, I changed doctors. You know, Aziz used to tease me. You know, I was not from the ANC. So one time at some stage, my party, Azapo, had one member in parliament. So Aziz says, we have to investigate the Electoral Commission. How does Azapo get a seat when it has only 4 members? This is Musala, Musibudi Mangena, Ambassador Rakwena, and you, Mujamku. How do you get a seat in parliament? But, you know, I got to understand the ANC more from Aziz than from my boss. Because Aziz says to me, Mujanku, the ANC is my life. He says, when I first kissed a girl, it was at an ANC youth retreat. You know, when I first blacked out, it was at an ANC meeting. You know, when I had my first heartbreak, it was this girl I was dating from the ANC. And he says to me, it's who I am. It's in my blood. So I'm saying this because, you know, the last lunch we had, Angela, at home. So it's Isop, Meg, then me, Aziz, and Angela. Not the big one, you know, the small one. So I said to Aziz, Aziz, I'm here to recruit you. We must form a new political party. So he's like, okay, let's hear. So it's Isop who gives us the best advice. Isop says to Mjangu, you're wasting your time. You know, we old people in the ANC want to die ANC, and we are going to die ANC. Forget about us. Go and try and recruit the young people. But Aziz says to me, no, let's talk about it, Mjangu. What do you have in mind? Oh, Aziz was really wonderful. You know, he used to say to me, when the government bought this plane, the president's plane in Kwaz, Aziz was just, sometimes he would say to Mjangu, please just tell President Beki that we have to go in advance to prepare for him and everything, because we couldn't get miles. You know, he wanted to get air miles. And Aziz is like, traveling one in Kwazi, we're not getting any air miles. So, you know, I'll put on my best straight face and say to President Beck, you know, Mr. President, you can't just arrive in Moscow or Washington. We have to go ahead and prepare. And he will just look at me and say, Mjangu, the government spent money to buy this plane. You're all coming on it. And Aziz was really something else. But the last thing I want to say is that, you know, at Zola Koya's funeral, Aziz, I don't know who said it to say, hey, Aziz, we're next. He's like, no, 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 not me. There's a long list ahead of me. And he started listing him, you know, John Chele, JJ, there's Meg, no Ruth Mumpati, I think, was still alive, or who. He lists them. He's like, all of the Aesop. He's sitting with him, he says, Aesop must go before me. And then I would come. But really, Angela, I just want to say that, you know, we really are better people for having known Aziz, for having walked by his side. And even as sad as it is that he's not with us, he will always be with us. You know, we remember everything about Aziz. And you know, in this time when, you know, keep getting reminded as I end with Antonio Gramsci's prison notebooks, when he says the old world is dying and the new is struggling to be born. It is a time for monsters. We see those monsters. And it is really sad that Aziz is not with us to try and deal with those monsters. But we can't give up. We have to face those monsters up front, and it is possible to have a better world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ujanku, for reminding us about those episodes with Aziz. You know, over the weekend, when I saw that the South African Zionist Federation and the Jewish Board of Deputies were having some festival somewhere in Johannesburg and certain things were being said, it reminded me of Aziz, because these two organizations, there was a time when we had decided, under the instruction of Jesse Duarte, that we are going to engage them every fortnight, because we knew that they had a direct line to Prime Minister Netanyahu. How Aziz got to know this, and he said, if we have to convey any messages, let's engage these ones. And in the absence of that engagement, then of course we've seen whatever happened this weekend, which is a bit disgusting to say the least. Comrade Sydney, before you kick me, let me lead you to the.
So,
Yeah, it's just here.
where?
Yeah,
What is here?
yeah, just talk.
Oh, program director and room keys. Sorry, Weliland Sapo. Same difference, yes. Professor Parek, Minister Pando, Sizanele, members of the diplomatic corps, ladies and gentlemen, I really am standing here to share my sadness, a sadness born out of incredulity. I'm finding it difficult to accept that Aziz is gone. I can't associate Aziz with death. Very, very difficult. Aziz came into my universe, at least from the point of view of knowing about him, some 45 years ago. At the time, we had established a trade union which was known as the General and Allied Workers Union. I was really in the formative stages of my activism then, drawn into the trenches by stalwarts of the ANC, the South African Communist Party, and SACTU, who came with the movement from the 50s. So they led us into forming this union. Very sentimental people. There were places where we could get very good offices. They really took us to an informal office space in Ferreira's town, Beckett Street. The name of the building was called Chancellor House. Those were the offices of Mandela and Tambo, and therefore they became the offices of our union. I then got shown a place in Beckett Street by one of these senior comrades, Ritanzanga, and she said this was the home of Gulam and Amina Pahad. In later years, indeed, I saw Ritanzanga appearing in some of the historical books with two little chaps carrying placards written, "Hands off our leaders." Those were Gulam and Amina's kids, Isup and Aziz. I never thought that one day I will get them to know them. I'll get to know them in the way I ultimately intimately got to know them. Of the two kids, I first met Aziz, and then later I met Aesop. They were sort of a little bit older than me, 20 years difference. In the ANC, it's a little bit because the ANC is not a ZAPO, it's an old organization. So I meet Aziz. I need to talk about the circumstances in which we met. I know there are issues of time. I think our constitution will be tested to the limit. Given my age now and the fact that I am currently living with some disability, my affirmative time will be taken full advantage of. So I met, there was a time before 1994, to be precise, about 43 years ago, maybe less, but certainly about 40 years ago, when the apartheid regime had unfolded a program of repression against the mass democratic movement. As at that time, we had 6,000 people in state of emergency detention. So the leadership of the mass democratic movement met to try and work out what to do. And we came to some reading of the situation at the time. And we felt we wanted to share that with the ANC leadership in exile. I don't like this concept of exile, but that's what it was. So Mohammed Valley and myself traveled incognito to England to join up with other comrades from the MDM. I think it was Mr. Grobler who spoke about Mike Terry. Mike Terry picked us up from Heathrow Airport and drove us to some venue outside London, where we met an ANC delegation that was led by Alfred Nzo, Comrade Alfred Nzo. One of the people who were part of that delegation was Josiah Jale. I'm mentioning him because I spoke to him yesterday to get permission to speak here. So Aziz was there. So we get to the meeting. We had written from the MDM what we thought was a very good paper analyzing the situation. But it became clear during the course of the discussion that we had brought to that meeting, us and them, divergent readings of the situation. The ANC delegation spoke first. I remember the opening sentence. It was, the imperialists are trying to create an impression that there is a stalemate in South Africa. And the main thrust of our argument in our own paper was that there is a stalemate in South Africa. Such was the impact of the repression that our movement was no longer making advances, although the other side was not succeeding to roll back our gains. So when I was talking to George yesterday, and I said, you remember that event? I was meeting Aziz for the first time. We brought divergent views to the meeting. He said, you call it divergent views? Many pais, Alapa. Many pais. You didn't know what you were talking about. But it was true that in the end, we deferred to their strategic reading of the situation, in which they were saying, in truth, the ANC has become the main motive force for everything that is happening in South Africa. We are not in parliament, but no parliamentary session will end without those chaps in parliament quarreling about the ANC. So Aziz was then tasked to present a paper in which he was talking about, the topic was inter-imperialist dynamics and the possibilities these dynamics give us. And Aziz was then arguing that in terms of his reading, we have possibilities to continue to build a strong resistance movement inside the country, and at the same time, build a strong constituency abroad, including in what then he called the belly of the beast. So incisive was his analysis that you could feel that what he was giving is what nowadays is called a deep dive into the world historical moment at the time. So by the time we finished that particular session, they had succeeded to agitate us to go back home and fight. Because we could see the possibilities of taking the struggle forward. They were talking about the enemy, powerful, yes, underpinned by imperialism, yes. Take the war to the enemy. That's the language they were using. But they didn't tell us that they were talking to the other side at the same time. And of course, in later years, he said, how could we demobilize you? So in the evening, Aziz takes me out for a drink. That's where our drinking partnership started. So he takes me out for a drink. As we were drinking, we then start to discover that both of us grew up in the study circles of the same movement. He got to know what I knew about him. And then after a few glasses, you know, Aziz is likable, all these things that I hear people say. I've not heard anyone saying he was intellectually arrogant, which was one of his traits. But that comes out after a few glasses. So he says to me, now, Chief, you guys were telling us at the meeting that you understand the situation better because you are on the ground. When you are on the ground, which is well and good, you better know what it is that you are doing on the ground. Then I realized that Aziz can be arrogant. But then he realized that he seemed to realize that I was a bit hurt. You know, he hurt my ego then. So he decides to patronize me. He says, "Oh yeah. Sorry, just explain that." Okay. So he says, "Chief, you say you were born in 1959, a year before the ANC was banned. Where did you get this good politics of yours?" Uh, so I said, let me hit back. I said, well, I did not have the misfortune of belonging to the youth movement. So I was taught good politics from the beginning. But I'm saying we got to know each other very well from that point onwards. We went our separate ways. The struggle continued. On a number of occasions when I had to go out on missions, sometimes I would bump into Aziz by organized accident. Sometimes it would be straightforward joint assignment. I met Aziz on one occasion in Amsterdam. I was part of a COSATU delegation which had gone there for a bilateral meetings. And we met also with Aziz, Joe Slovo, Kay Munsami, and John Gadime. Years later, someone was spoke, I think Mr. Krobler, about the interest which the police had in Aziz. So years later, Moshe had infiltrated the special branch in Durban, as a result of which his unit laid its hands on some reports which were being written by a mole who was in COSATU. And this mole had written about this meeting we had in Amsterdam. Lists who was there and so on. Aziz was described as an Asian male in the report to the police. Then there were other reports by the same mole. So Mo and Mac Maharaj come to me. Mac was, of course, illegally in the country at the time. And they give me these reports and they say, we think we know who the mole is, but read these reports and tell us what your own deduction is. It was very simple because that person had attended several meetings. And in the end, that person from the COSATU side was the common denominator to all the meetings. And there was no other person who was the common denominator to all the meetings that were being reported on. So there was that interest, of course, by the special branch, understandably, on the movement. But Aziz was described in the way he was described, and there were other things that were said about him. Other sign of that interest was when Mr. de Klerk, after we came into government, came to me and said, I was then Minister for Safety and Security, there is someone who was an undercover agent for the South African police working in London. And this person has their fallout with the police. They are refusing to pay him for work done. Can you meet this person so that you hear if you can get the police to pay him? So I met the person, and that person was properly trained. He didn't give me much except some kind of headlines, a flavor of what he was doing. But he did say that one of his tasks was to surveil Aziz. So I tell Aziz. Now, Aziz does not respond in panic or anything like that because he was trained in other things. So he now becomes his professional self. He says, no, you know what? Tell the commissioner that before you can authorize that this chap be paid, they must give you all the reports he wrote so that you can determine whether their quality justifies that he be paid the amounts that he's asking for. Now you can work out what Aziz was doing. So that was Aziz. So the organization gets unbanned. We are now together in the country. Aziz remains my drinking partner, but there are others also now. That's why I'm saying I've lost one of my drinking partners. So there are others also who will remain nameless. They are too big to be named. So Aziz and Aesop cannot drive. On Fridays, the family expect them to join them for lunch. So I become the driver. I become the driver and get exposed to the luncheons, which Nelson Mandela and Oliver Tambo used to have on Fridays, Beckett Street. Those ones were cooked by Amina, the mother to Aesop and Aziz. So I was, in that sense, a big family friend. We drive around. Even as we are driving, the car is a study circle. We are debating issues in the car. On one occasion, we drove to Botswana. It was me, Aziz, Aesop. I have a sense of time, so I won't say President Mbeki, Thabo Mbeki then. So we are going to watch football in Botswana. Bafana Bafana are playing there. Then there was a big quarrel suddenly in the car. It's the siblings. I think I understood. You know, people keep on trying to understand why these two used to quarrel. So the other was born in 1940, the interwar period. You know where I come from, present-day Limpopo. Children who were born during that period had names. My uncle was called Chiwandarani, meaning that this one was born during the time of scarcity. You know what wars do. So they were probably quarreling over rationing. They grew up quarreling during that period. So they would quarrel over anything and everything. So we are just listening as they are quarreling. And Aziz is one person who cannot be bullied. Someone was talking about expletives. And as Aesop will, Aziz will say, Fusek, you are not going to bully me, you. So I try to intervene. Aesop stops quarreling with Aziz. He quarrels with me now. What do you know? I'm old enough to be your mother. And Aziz comes back and says, what does his mother have to do with this? So we quarreled a bit with Aesop. Tambo is quiet. And when Tambo enters the fray, he says, Aesop and Sydney, this thing is simple. You are both right, man. So that is the life we led. We come into government. What we call it, two center capital is Cape Town, Pretoria. So Aziz says, no, in Pretoria, we stay in your house. In Cape Town, we stay in my house. So we cohabited. I didn't know that whilst I was accepting that contract to act as his talent scout, Mo Sheikh was also contracted to do the same job. So Mo Sheikh, well, I heard this being said by Professor Parek last week. Of course, I knew about it. I came to know about it later. Mo Sheikh brought Professor Parek and Aziz together. And when Professor Parek was saying, you know, he made an impression on me on the first day, I thought she was talking about my own impression of Aziz. Because that is what happened on my first encounter with Aziz. So she says, good impression, and so on. The very same day, I ended up driving him home, and so on. So they decide to get married. Mo Sheikh gets paid, and the payment is that he's the best man on the occasion. But Aziz had a very good sense of equity. I was paid the same reward, I was given the same reward even though I did not deliver. So both of us were joint best men. And we were guaranteed lifetime comradeship. Aziz, after that particular wedding, I bumped into Moeletsi Mbeki. So I said, well, I didn't see you at the wedding. Where were you? He says, which wedding? I tell him, he says, was Aziz getting married? So I said, yes. Then I report this to Aziz. Well, it was not there. He says, if he thinks he'll attend my next wedding, he will be disappointed because this is my last wedding. There'll be no other. And he kept to that. He kept to that. My life partner and I were models that they looked at, Anjina and Aziz. But Anjina then recruits me. That is usually recruits me to work for her at UJ. And Aziz had a theory. He says, you know, that Anjina, she's domesticating you. She wants you to become, she wants to, she overestimates your influence over me. So she wants to shape the nature of your influence over me because you are her subordinate. So you must be very careful. Let me leave those things now and talk a little bit of the serious things that Aziz and I did together. As Mujanko was saying, we would be posted to same missions, sometimes jointly, sometimes separately. But because we often lived together, we would always be thinking partners about the tasks that we were given. Some of these tasks on the face of it were difficult even to comprehend. But Aziz, I must say, had the intellectual temperament for these tasks. He had the personal proclivity for them. Consistent with what Oliver Tambo taught us, that if you want peace, he was saying this in the context of the problems we had then in Natal. If you want peace, you cannot bypass your opponent and get peace. We understood this to mean that when you are in the quest for peace, you don't only talk to your friends. I had been to missions with Aziz in which I got to meet Jonas Savimbi, Alfonso Dhlakama, and we at the time did not succumb to the tyranny of the madman thesis that there are these people who are not amenable to persuasion, therefore don't talk to them. That's why Aziz found himself in Baghdad. We went to Washington to meet Richard Armitage, Condoleezza Rice, the neoconservatives, as they are called. We wanted to call out their Wilsonian idealism, the notion that it is correct to impose your notion of democracy on other people. Having Aziz with us was very useful because he had been to Baghdad. So we had very respectful discussions in the formal meeting. When they took us out for dinner, after 2 glasses, Aziz says, You guys, you know that you are talking rubbish actually. Saddam Hussein has no weapons of mass destruction. I am from there, and you better tell that Colin Powell that he has no weapons of mass destruction. But the most important thing is that as at that time, we were really advising them not to invade Iraq. They thought they were going to go in there for 3 months and come out having accomplished their mission. And we told them that you are going to get stuck in that quagmire for years. They went in and they suffered a massive strategic defeat. They suffered a massive strategic defeat, which they now admit to us was the case. So they had the privilege of listening to an Aziz Pahad who had the equipment of foresight, but they thought that we were a small country with no right to advise them.
Comrade Kinda, I just got a message from George.
Yes.
He says the minister is about to leave at some point.
Okay, I'm winding down. I'm
So
definitely winding down.
Don't tell
Yeah.
him to.
Yes, I'm definitely winding down. So I said, we advised, we were not listened to. Right now, as I was saying earlier, Aziz is gone. He left us at a time when the world order is obviously in a state of flux. He leaves us at a moment when we need people of his type, people who are able to operate at the high level of political ideation to help us work out what needs to be done now. He would advise, I guess, that you can't solve the problem by trying to wipe out your interlocutor. This is an advice that currently we are trying to give to our Israeli friends as well as our friends in Palestine. And indeed, they are choosing to march. I heard the Sunday school politics that were being spoken in those marches about the one side being inherently evil and the other side being the side of angels. That is not the way to look at the problems the world is facing today. Mindful of the time, I am wrapping up now. I'm saying, pity, Comrade Aziz is gone. He lies in his final resting place alongside his brother Isup, West Park Cemetery. I am planning with my friends to visit Aziz. We intend to take the MTNA trophy, 8 trophy, to Aziz. I know that ESOP will look at us and say, you think you are champions? This is a fluke, man. So everything that we've known them for, they are continuing where they are. And thank you.
Yeah, lucky Sydney, you meet me at my old age. You'd have moved from the stage running. I'm now going to call Ambassador Saleh Omar Abdu, the Ambassador of the State of Eritrea to South Africa and Dean of the Diplomatic Corps. I think I remember meeting you somewhere, some time back.
Sometime.
Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. I promise I won't compete with lunchtime. I promise I will be very, very brief. Good afternoon. Dr. Naledi Pandor, Minister of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, Professor Angina Pahad, Deputy Ministers present, DDGs, my friend, Executive Director of Accord, Mr. Van Vicker, family of the bereaved, friends of the family of the bereaved Aziz Pahad, members of Diplomatic Corps, Excellencies, Ambassadors and High Commissioners, distinguished guests, and fellow mourners. Permit me to extend our deepest condolences on behalf of the heads of mission, ambassadors and high commissioners represented in the Republic of South Africa on the passing of the former Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad. As a collective, we convene this day to honor and commemorate the life and legacy of the late Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad. The historical records of the Republic of South Africa bear witness to his enduring impact, which serves as evidence of life committed to the advancement of justice, diplomacy, and public service. Deputy Minister Pahad was not just a public figure. He was compassionate leader, those unwavering commitment to the betterment of the society left an indelible mark to all who had the privilege of knowing him. His journey was one of the resilience, courage, and tireless advocacy for the principles he held dear. Aziz Pahad served his country with distinction, navigating the complex landscape of politics and diplomacy with grace and intellect. As Deputy Minister, I believe he played a pivotal role in shaping post-apartheid Ministry of Foreign Affairs and subsequently the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. His passion for diplomacy was matched only by his dedication to the well-being of the people he served. Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad, an eminent figure in the struggle against apartheid, emerged as a prominent advocate for human rights and social progress. His unwavering dedication was directed at fostering more promising trajectory for the people of South Africa, the African continent, and the humanity at large. His contribution to peace negotiations in diverse regions of Africa and the Middle East have been imprinted indelibly. The late former Deputy Minister is regarded by us diplomats a distinguished diplomat. I repeat, Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad is regarded by us diplomats a distinguished diplomat. In numerous instances, he had a group of distinguished professional stewards from his department. Among others, our current program director, Ambassador Walile Nshilapo, who was the first ambassador to the state of Eritrea, addresses our diplomatic community represented in the Republic of South Africa on multiple occasions. Some of my colleagues and I, both individually and collectively, have had the great honor of drinking from the deep reservoir of knowledge and wisdom, something that has helped us to have a broader and cleaner understanding of the new South Africa's commitment to a better Africa and a better world. Your Excellencies, fellow mourners, in time of challenge, Deputy Minister Pahad stood as a beacon of hope, championing dialogue over discord and understanding over animosity. He believed in the power of collaboration and saw diplomacy not as mere transaction, but as a bridge between nations, fostering understanding and cooperation. Aziz Pahad's legacy extends beyond the corridors of power. He was a mentor, a friend, and an inspiration to many who sought to follow in his footsteps. His wisdom, humanity, and the ability to find common ground were the hallmarks of his leadership. As we refer on Deputy Minister Pahad's life, let us not only mourn the loss of great statesman, but celebrate the enduring impact he has left on our collective journey as justice-loving people. Let us his legacy serve as a reminder that even in the face of adversity, one individual's commitment to justice and compassion can resonate through generations. Distinguished guests, permit me to assert that the passing of His Excellency Pahad has resulted in a vacuum caused by the absence of national discourse on the African continent and beyond. As diplomats, we pursue to ensure that his successors are equipped with the knowledge and the abilities to negotiate peacefully, sustainably, and progress collectively. It is necessary and imperative that we fill that lacuna. Let us honor Aziz Pahad by continuing the work he so passionately pursued. Let us strive for better Africa and a better world where dialogue triumphs over discord, justice prevails over injustice, and compassion guides our every action. Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad may no longer be with us, but his spirits live on the ideals he cherished and the positive change he worked tirelessly to bring about. In closing, we pay tribute to a man who dedicated his life to the cause of justice, freedom, and diplomacy. Aziz Pahad's contribution to international relations and his unwavering commitment to the principles of diplomacy leave us enduring legacy. As we bid farewell to this extraordinary individual, we must carry forward his vision of a more just and peaceful world. May his memory inspire us all to strive for a better, more equitable world through the power of diplomacy, understanding, and dialogue. Aziz Pahad's legacy lives in the hearts of all those who work tirelessly to make this world a better place. place. Please accept our deepest condolences again for a true Pan-Africanist comrade, Aziz Pahad. May his soul rest in peace. Amen. And thank you.
Can the choir give us a very short, sweet chorus as we going to invite our next speaker? I will leave that to the co-director to do so.
Thank you.
Give a thought to Africa. Is the burning soul where the home of easy stars waiting to be won? Many lives have gone away, and in many homes where the voice is crying down to the living God. In the Lord be Lord, by the God is of the Lord. Thank you very much, choir master, and the beautiful voices. Beautiful song. We're getting to the end, and I just wanted to say to all of you, thank you so much for your patience, for sitting and listening to the tributes to Aziz Pahad. And that, you know, when one pays tribute to somebody of Aziz's stature, time always is a wicked problem. And so, Minister, and also Mrs. Pahad, this is just to acknowledge, to say thank you to both of you for staying till the end. And we'd like to invite you both to come up and pay your own tributes to our dear brother, Aziz Pahad.
Minister Pando, Deputy Minister, Sis Sanele, Your Excellencies, High Commissioners and Ambassadors, both past and present, the Director General, comrades, families and friends, all protocol observed. I put myself today in Aziz's shoes. Having lived with the man for over 20 years, one begins to realize that soon those shoes start to fit. And the very first thing Aziz would have said to our two program directors is, "You are fired." For one reason only: you do not come between a guest and their food, and you don't come between me and my drink. So I'm going to do what Aziz did at my nephew's party a year ago. He had prepared a speech. He was asked to speak at his 40th. It wasn't quite the 40th, it was 42nd, but COVID couldn't celebrate. And so he had prepared these wonderful notes and his speech. And when he stood up to speak, he threw aside his speech and just spoke. And we were all aghast because we weren't quite sure what he was now going to say, because he did have a few glasses of wine before he did speak. But it was one of the most brilliant speeches he's ever made. Well, I haven't had quite the few glasses of wine beforehand. I'm not quite sure it's going to be as brilliant as Aziz did. But all I can say is that I hope that I would do him some honor in just sharing with you some of my life with him. Certainly, I have spoken last week about Aziz's relationship and mine, the love that we enjoyed with each other, and just the extraordinary years that we spent together. But I also know that when we talk about Aziz, and we often talk about the fact that the ANC was part of his life, it was part of his DNA. I also know that it was foreign affairs that was part of his DNA. For him, foreign affairs was not just a cabinet appointment. It was what his life was all about. He loved people. He loved the world. And he absolutely loved the engagement that international relations brought to him. The years that we spent together was wonderful, because through Aziz, I have got to meet so many people, not just from our beautiful country in Africa, but from across the continent and across the more global arena. Our house was always an office for people to come and talk about the world, from former heads of states, foreign ministers, ambassadors, both past and present, and of course, the ANC comrades. And often those engagements would happen over wonderful dinners and lots of glasses of wine. I remembered when Aziz and I left Brinterian in 2008 to live in Johannesburg. We had just decided that we were going to move to Joburg, and we bought a house. And the one thing I had to figure out was, how do I fit in a 14-seater dining table in a very small dining room? Because for Aziz, a 6-seater table would never have done. He always loved people, and the more, the merrier. And so we've had wonderful, wonderful times. And I often said to him that I thought I had learned everything being myself an academic, but I certainly learned so much more from him. I've learned about the world. I've learned about foreign policy. I became the consummate backseat foreign affairs expert. And I would talk confidently about foreign policy to anyone who was very politely there to listen to me. Never shy to express a view about things that were happening in the world. But coming back to Pretoria today was quite an emotional journey for me. It's where I met Aziz. It's where we spent much of our time at least 7 to 8 years in Pretoria. And it was a very joyful, joyful time. The hustle and bustle of people coming in and out of the house, the kind of constant farewells that Aziz would have for ambassadors and high commissioners and other dignitaries that were leaving, the kind of constant cocktail events that we would have at the he would have at the diplomatic guest house, the kind of lots of state dinners. I must say, I never quite took to state dinners. I found them quite exhausting. But it was just a hugely, hugely exciting time. There were some fun moments as well. I remember a kind of an incident where there was a state dinner for President Mahmoud Abbas at the time when President Thabo Mbeki was also the president of the country. There was a state dinner. At the time, the foreign minister, Nkosazana Zuma, was unable to attend that dinner, and therefore the protocol had asked Aziz Abi to join the two presidents on the podium for that state dinner. Well, for me, it was a first, and I was quite nervous about sitting up there. And at one point, after the speeches were over and the dinner had begun, Aziz turned to me and said that he was going to the bathroom. I didn't think anything of it, and oh, sure. And 20 minutes later, Aziz doesn't return. And then President Mbeki turned around to me and said, "Where is Aziz?" And I said, "Well, President, he said he was going to the toilet." And he turned around and says, "That bugger." He knew that all Aziz was doing was going to socialize with the comrades. Aziz, you couldn't stop Aziz. He was just Aziz. And, you know, whether he was with a state president or state presidents, if he wanted to do something, he did what he did. But he did it so well and in such a lovable way that nobody could ever remain or be angry with Aziz. Ladies and gentlemen, there were a lot of things that were said today about Aziz, the diplomat that he was, the kind of principles that he lived by, and the values and the quality and all of that. I can only say that what you saw in Aziz, the diplomat, was the same person even at home. A huge amount of respect, a huge amount of pride in allowing the other to have their independence and to speak and to share their views. And I'm grateful for all of that time that I've had with him. But I do know that in the later years, there were issues that were top of his mind for him. He was deeply concerned about the trajectory of South Africa. But in all of this, he's remained optimistic that we could return to the values that South Africa was founded on. He believed that South Africa could and must make a difference in building a better world, and that South Africa has the agency to construct a better world. He was also deeply concerned about developing the young ones within the department. And for this, he did give freely of his time and energy. He would often tell me that the department is only as good as its next generation of diplomats and leaders. And then lately, in his absence, I find myself thinking about these words, especially as we see the troubles of our troubled world manifest almost on a daily basis. In a sense, Aziz was right about many things, but the one thing that he often said to me, which I think resonates well as a tribute to him, is that he said it's not the work that you do that matters more. It is the purpose of the work that you do that matters. So if we wish to keep his legacy alive, let us join forces and continue to work for a better life for all. I thank you very much, and I would like to say thank you very much to DIRCO for hosting this event to say farewell to Aziz, my husband, my partner, my companion, and so much more. of the past 20 years. I would also like to single out, if I may, Ambassador Losi and her team for the arrangements. I know it's been a long journey insofar as putting this together, but to thank you again from myself and on behalf of the Pahad and Parekh family. And I hope that Dirka will continue to see our home as an office for more dialogue, more conversation, more get-togethers, and more looking at solutions and possibilities for us to collectively apply our minds to how we can resolve conflicts. Our house is always open. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angina, for those wonderful words. Of course, you know that I was always very worried that Comrade Aziz stole you from us in the academic community. And when I learned that he was your partner, I remember saying to you, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" But I saw that it was a wonderful relationship, and I really thank you both for the joy you brought to him, as well as for the words you've said today. Thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. And I must again say, I can see that this life was so rich that should we have 10 memorials, we would take up as much time as we've taken today. This was a person who was larger than life. What I found intriguing is in all the words that have been said, no reference has been made to the mobile hands. Very expressive hands that Comrade Aziz had. And initially, I remember when first meeting him and listening to him, I had, this concentration on these very mobile hands. But I eventually realized actually it's the mouth you've got to watch, because real intellect, real gems come out of that mouth. An incredible person. Having listened to everyone, I don't wish to really repeat everything, but being the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, I have to say the Pahad family, Professor Parekh, Deputy Minister, DG, Mrs. Mbeki Sistanele, senior officials, excellencies, ambassadors, and high commissioners, all speakers who've spoken today, guests, and dear choir. You've been really amazing. Thank you very, very much. I would like to begin by saying Comrade Aziz was a fierce proponent of an independent foreign policy for South Africa. We remember him for many initiatives that he led during his 14 years in this department. One particular initiative is his prominent role in South Africa's ambitious endeavor to stop a US-led attack on Iraq. Before the outbreak of the war in Iraq, he shuttled between Pretoria and Baghdad, trying to convince President Saddam Hussein to cooperate with the UN's weapons inspectors. He strategized for many months on how to avert regime change in Iraq, but the forces of neo-imperialism unfortunately won the day. But above all else, Comrade Aziz was a principled champion for human rights, especially of the oppressed and marginalized. From Palestine to Western Sahara, he spoke for the voiceless and was unwavering in his implementation of South Africa's foreign policy, which recognizes the right to self-determination. And I wish to assure Professor van Niekerk that we continue to follow in that tradition. His work on promoting a two-state solution with Israel and Palestine, and his lobbying against the Israeli apartheid wall at the International Court of Justice are among his greatest legacies. He was South Africa's face at the International Court of Justice when South Africa argued strongly against Israel's erection of the apartheid wall on Palestinian land. At the time, he told the court, the Palestinian separation wall is not a security wall. It is a wall of occupation, a wall that has separated hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their families, their homes, lands, and religious sites. One of the things that has been said about him is Comrade Aziz was a fantastic debater, and I must say a disciplined representative in Parliament who always honored his speaking assignments in the National Assembly. As has been said, he served as a special envoy for peace in the Middle East for 3 years in the period 2014 and 2017. He played a very important role in South Africa's attempt to revive the Middle East peace process. Unfortunately, when the special envoys went to Tel Aviv, Prime Minister Netanyahu refused to meet the special envoys on 2 occasions. Had perhaps Prime Minister Netanyahu been wiser, we may have been having peace between Palestine and Israel today. If Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad was with us today, he surely would have been devastated by the threatened genocide in the Gaza Strip. For years, many have held the view that eventually reason is going to prevail in that region. And many of us continue to hold to the belief that the forces of compromise might emerge and a negotiated settlement might be found, despite the numerous obstacles and controversies surrounding the final status issues. I am glad that Comrade Aziz never got to see the continual bombardment of the citizens of Gaza going into the 11th day today. A bombardment that is wreaking untold devastation and suffering on people who only wish to live in freedom in their land. As Israeli tanks prepared to roll into northern Gaza as part of a plan of genocide to rid Gaza of its people and push them into the Sinai desert, Comrade Aziz would have surely have been livid and unrelenting in his condemnation, as unrelenting as all of us should be. As a person who championed the anti-apartheid cause in London and participated in countless demonstrations and solidarity campaigns, he would have hailed the support of the British people who have gone out into the streets in their thousands to raise their voices in solidarity with the people of Palestine. He would have condemned the British government for their silence on occupation and on the colonial settler project, and for having seemingly become an enabler by not only providing political cover for Israel's action, but by stationing Royal Navy ships off the coast to ensure there is no pushback against this campaign of terror. Comrade Aziz would have railed in fury and disbelief that the British authorities could suggest that any Briton who raises a Palestinian flag will be arrested. It was a dark day in Britain's democracy when the UK Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, she who is not brave, told senior police officers that waving a Palestinian flag or singing a chant advocating freedom for Arabs
in the region may be a criminal offense. Unbelievable. The British people have drowned out such insanity by taking to the streets of London in the tens of thousands, waving the Palestinian flag in defiance. And we in South Africa need to join them. What has been most disappointing in the past 11 days has been the conspiracy of silence amongst countries we consider friends, who have not had the backbone to speak out against what Israel is doing. I'm talking about friendly countries in both Europe and the Arab world. It is inexplicable that we've not heard any stinging rebuke coming from the international community for Israel's ethnic cleansing campaign, although the rebuke of Hamas by many has been deafening. The carnage that is still unfolding will ensure that the world is never the same again. And history is going to judge us all harshly if we do not act to stop these crimes against humanity and gross violations of international humanitarian law and the various Geneva Conventions. The time for hand-wringing and sitting on the wall is over. It is time to stand up and be counted so that our children know we stood on the right side of history. We need to show the Palestinian people in our millions that they are not alone. Freedom for Palestinians will mean peace for Israel and peace for the Middle East. Comrade Pahad repeatedly emphasized the need for negotiations and compromise in conflict situations. He also ensured that the African continent was the cornerstone of our foreign policy, and it remains so today. In Africa, he played an active role in bringing about peace between warring factions in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and he was particularly active during the Sun City dialogue. For him, these assignments were not just part of the job. He said at the time that he was driven by a belief that a better South Africa, Africa, and world could be achieved. And these are words that he repeated every time he made an important foreign policy speech, including in 2007 to the Institute of International Affairs, driven by a belief that a better South Africa, Africa, and world is achievable. He was very quick to brush aside accusations that South Africa was trying to punch above its weight. He responded by saying, people must realize that we are a major economic power in Africa. It is our responsibility to use this power in the interest of Africa. We are not punching above our weight. We are conscious of what is achievable by a country like South Africa. Later, he became the special envoy for our candidature to the UN Security Council. And again, he gave a very important speech in Cape Town where he outlined what our presence and membership of the Security Council would mean. He had, in the course of that lobbying process, warned that the international community might be sleepwalking its way into a global conflict without understanding that there can be no victors in a future world war. His words have become more prescient today than any of us could have imagined. In April 2021, when the University of Pretoria conferred an honorary doctorate of literature on him, his contributions to local and international peace, security, justice, and international solidarity were being acknowledged. The university said, Pahad's contributions and approach to diplomacy bring strong moral convictions, careful judgment, and above all, a quiet, influential determination in the search for solutions to South Africa's challenges. At the Ubuntu Awards organized by DIRCO in February last year, Comrade Pahad was awarded the O.R. Tambo Lifetime Achievement Award in recognition of his contribution to a South Africa that is free and democratic, and a world that has become increasingly just and fair in many parts of the world. On behalf of all South African diplomats at home and abroad, and all freedom-loving people, we in DIRCO extend once more our deepest condolences to the Pahad family. It must be really, really hard to lose two significant personalities like Esop Pahad and Aziz Pahad. I think Esop had a quiet pride in Aziz, although he often treated him like he was really quite off his rocker. You know, he'd say like, "Uchini wena," you know, to Aziz when Aziz tried to speak, and Aziz would patiently, you know, speak and explain whatever point he was making in a cabinet committee or indeed in a cabinet meeting. We wish, as DIRCO, that the indomitable spirit of Comrade Aziz will continue to guide our country as we work hard to create and realize that wish for a better South Africa, a better Africa, and a better world. And all we say to the family is that we wish that the Almighty would have mercy on his soul and permit him to rest in peace. And we thank each and every one of you for being here today. For me, not to mourn, but to celebrate a wonderful, great South African leader. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Pandu, for echoing the sentiments that we would have heard from Aziz about what is happening in Palestine in much almost the same way, because that's how he felt about that situation. And that's how some of us continue to feel even today. I would like to thank all of you for your patience and for having come today to pay homage to the legacy of Aziz Pahad. Those of us who grew up under him, and he'd always say we grew up together. Maybe to my extent he was correct. Would like to say thank you very much to DIRCO for doing what is only correct to bring back the memory of Aziz into this Oliver Tambo building, because that's where he belongs. Thank you, Ambassador Losi, for your passion and tireless efforts in making sure that today we're able to honor the legacy of Aziz Pahad in the manner in which we have done. I hope Minister, Deputy Ministers and DG and the leadership of this department that maybe at some point in this building, something that carries the name of Aziz Pahad will be there. If not dedicated to some particular space, but maybe for his passion to have an award from the best student in our academy who performed as a diplomat in the making. Because I think in that way, we'll be honoring him and encouraging young people that it is possible and they can be able to achieve what Aziz Pahad has been able to. That's how we will mentor our diplomats. And I think that's how we will maintain the professionalism of this foreign service.